Hello. Welcome back to Kim Reads. We continue with Phantom. When Luciano was 3 years old, her mother and I had a row which surely must have been heard by the Pope and the Vatican. It began with Angela, then an ungainly girl of 13, running onto the building site with her skirts flapping madly around fat ankles. Papa, Papa, come quickly. Mama's locked Luciano in the cellar and she's screaming the house down. She'll choke if she doesn't stop, Papa. But Mama says she won't let her out till supper time. I left the site with a face like thunder, all my men staring at me with roughly veiled sympathy. Even at 3, Luciana was notorious in her own right. I could hear the screaming when I was still 2 streets away, and I felt my temper rise as I stormed out of the house. Don't you dare, Giovanni, Isabella shrieked as I made for the cellar. Don't you dare undermine my authority with that wretched child again. I swung around at the top of the cellar steps as she caught up my arm. How dare you do this, I shouted. How dare you make me look like a fool in front of my men, locking a baby down in the cellar. You must be mad. She's not a baby. She's 3 years old, and if she doesn't learn to do as she's told to, and I promise she won't live to be 4. I've had enough of her tantrums. Do you hear me, Giovanni? I've had enough. It's all your fault. You've ruined her since the day she was born, and now no one can do a thing with her, including you. I ran down to the cellar, kicked open the door, and picked up the sodding, hysterical bundle which lay in a pool of urine and vomit on the stone flag floor. On the stairs, I paused to fix Isabella with a look of contempt that made her shrink against the wall. I was so beside myself with fury that I thought I might actually strike her for the first time in our 25 years of marriage. It's not her fault you couldn't give me a boy, I said with bare control. If you ever do this again, perhaps I'll find someone else who can. And so went on through Luciano's turbulent childhood. The rows, the scenes, the interminable conflict between Isabella and myself. Where once we lived in perfect harmony, there was now constant discord, and all of it shamelessly propagated by the exquisite, pretty child whose willful winsomeness was the light of my late middle age. Surrounded as I was by a colorless crop of females, Luciano seemed like a mischievous ray of sunshine peeping between dignified clouds. I was always powerless to resist the enchanting pout and the overly ready tears. 10 years on, I was finally obligated to admit that I'd been so utterly irresistible at 3 was not half so beguiling at 13. A widower by then, a full decade older, and less able to cope with the spectacular manifestations of Luciana's unstable personality, I was beginning to understand that Isabella's fears had not been without ground. The child began to run wild when her mother died. She lived for a brief time with Angela, and wreaked such havoc in her sister's household that I was forced to admit the need to send her away to a place where she might learn the harsh lessons of self-restraint. The convent school I chose was near Milan, far enough from home to discourage any thoughts of running away, yet close enough to the aunt who undertook to take charge of her in the brief Christmas and Easter vacations. Shouldn't that be holidays? Like, because she's European. Anyway. Always beguiled by the prospect of novelty, Luciana departed cheerfully enough for Milan, but within a fortnight I received the first series of tragic little letters. Dearest Papa, I am so very unhappy here. The nuns are very unkind, and none of the girls like me. Please change your mind and say I may come to you at Christmas after all. The letter kept me awake all night. I got it before there was a glimmer of light in the sky, and I wandered distractedly down to the nearest site. It was there that I saw Erik the first time and gained the strength to resist the artful pleas of my wicked little daughter. I determined to keep my original intention for once. Luciano would not be allowed to come home until summer. But now summer was upon me and I still had not told him. Why? All over Rome the bells were ringing and calling the faithful to early morning mass. As I come out into the schoolyard, adjusting the set of my hat, I tried to pretend I had not noticed Erik quietly pruning the Chinese wisteria that crept upon the trellis work. He never came with me to Mass, and I firmly resisted the temptation to ask him to do so. The boy's devotion to me had grown to the point where I strongly suspected he would cut off a finger should I once suggested I need of it. If you ever return to the face, I wish it be for the love of God and not for the love of me. It was Sunday, a good day to make a resolution and stick to it. I determined that as soon as I returned from Mass, I would tell him about Luciana. But just as soon as pulling my gloves, there was the sound of carriage wheels in the street outside, and I frowned. I wasn't expecting visitors. She flew into the courtyard to my unready embrace like a little bird let out of its cage. Her heavy hair flying out behind her like a cloak of black silk, and her piquant face flushed with excitement. Papa, I'm home. I never thought I'd get here. It's been such a horrid journey, so hot and tiresome. Oh, Papa, what's the matter? Aren't you pleased to see me? Luciana! I held her eager little finger slightly away from me, as one might seek to fend off the attentions of a lovable but over-exuberant puppy. My darling girl, what are you doing here? I didn't expect for another week. Oh, I know, isn't it wonderful? Sister Agnes and Sister Elizabeth had the fever, and we'd all been sent home early because of it. Surely there should have been some notification, Luciana. A letter at the very least. She pouted prettily. Oh, we were told to write home, and Papa, I really did mean to do it, but somehow I just never seemed to have a moment. I knew it wouldn't matter. I knew you'd be here. Oh, Papa, please don't be cross with me. Not my first day home. I kissed her hot cheek helplessly and turned to look at the tall figure who had silently taken refuge behind the riot of trailing foliage. The moment I had been instinctively avoiding should be avoided no longer. Erik, I said quietly, yet with an unmistakable note of command in my voice, I would like you to come and meet my youngest daughter, Luciana. For a long moment he did not move, and then slowly, reluctantly, he unfurled himself from the shadows to glide across the courtyard beneath the shelter of the cloak in which he had hastily shrouded himself. He glanced at me briefly, with pained surprise, the uncomfortable suspicion that his face might as well turn white as the mask that hid it. Luciana was staring at him, but not as I expected her to stare, with vulgar, tactless curiosity. Her eyes were resting on the mask with a sort of glazed fascination, and she seemed to be holding her breath as she held out her hand to him. Erik bowed gracefully, but his hand stopped just short of her gloved fingers, and I noticed he took great care not to touch her. Mademoiselle, he said softly, I must ask you to pardon my intrusion. A private moment of reunion. Sir, he turned to make exactly the same little bow courtesy to me. I should be glad if you would excuse me. There was nothing I could do in the face of his icy formality except make the signal of assent and free him to return to the house without a backward glance at either of us. When he had gone, Luciana clutched my arm with urgent and barely concealed excitement. Oh, Papa, she breathed with the ominous familiar note of subdued hysterical in her voice. Who is he? The peaceful ideal of pupil and master came to an end with Luciana's return, just as I secretly feared it must. She appeared in our quiet order firmament like a spectacular shooting star, and in her wake the bond that had been growing steadily between Erik and myself suffered inevitable strain. He no longer came to dine at my table, preferring to eat alone in the cellar. Nor did he come to sit any more of an evening beside my hearth, and permit me to delve my leisure into the bottomless wonders of unique imagination. His response confirmed the deep-rooted unease which had held me silent all these months. It was inevitable that a boy who was so worshipped beauty in every form would be dumbstruck by Luciana's heart-rending loveliness, and I was not surprised that his immediate reaction should let him bury himself between a wall of silence and retreat to the cellar like a wounded animal going to ground. I expected him to back away in pained horror from a situation that threatened to strip away all his natural defenses. What I had not anticipated was Luciana's response to his guarded aloofness, the inner misery and outrageous bad behavior that determined reserving cold correctness provoked in her. They scarcely met, he made very sure of that, but those occasions when they were urged with the intolerable tension generated by Luciana's hurt pride. The boy ignored her because he was afraid to betray himself to further pain. But Luciana could not bear his apparent indifference. She began to demand his attention with rudeness, sarcasm, and ridicule, the very things life had taught him to expect. For a month I was forced to stand by helplessly, watching my headstrong daughter fall in love, not with a living, breathing boy, but with a dream, a fantasy inspired by the primeval mystery of the mask. Once I chose to look into Luciana's eyes, as it was very easy to see and understand the primitive lure of the almost real dignity, the curious hypnotic quality of the unique voice. Beneath my roof I was sheltering a young prince of darkness. The sensuality of power radiated from his every gesture, but he remained entirely unaware of its extraordinary ability to attract. There were women here in Rome, women all over the world, who would have gladly sunk themselves in his shadow, had he only known it, had he dared to look beyond the cage in which he had determined to imprison himself. But he was blind to the most essential element of his own magnetism. Someone had taught him to expect only rejection and revulsion in the world, and now, in all the shyness of youth, he was merely repeating to himself whatever painful lessons he had been forced to learn by rote in childhood. Day after day I watched him suffer the cruel agony of first love. He did not speak his feelings to me, how could he? But in every swing of the mallet, every thrust of his easel, I felt his pain, and my helplessness grieved me. I watched him driving his young body to the breaking point of the sight in an effort to escape from the intolerable reality of loving a shallow, frivolous child who was entirely unworthy of him. And I could say nothing and do nothing because the bitter truth was that shallow, unworthy child was my daughter, and I loved her dearly in spite of her selfish triviality. All I could do was pray at the end of summer it would release them from the powdered keg of unexploded emotion. When Luciana returned to the convent, there would be another year of grace, a whole year for them to grow up and away from the feelings they were both, for vastly different reasons, emotionally incapable of expressing in an acceptable manner. During the terrible month of subdued hostility and repressed yearning, it was that one peg upon which I had hung all my hope of peace. I was a fool. I should have known my daughter well enough by then. She wasn't pretending when she told me she was too ill to go back to Milan. Luciana never needed to pretend. From earliest infancy she had always possessed the ability to make herself thoroughly ill when it suited her purposes. Now the eyes that looked beseechingly into mine and were unquestionably fever bright, and her pulse throbbing beneath my fingers like a butterfly's wing. I went downstairs grimly to dismiss the waiting carriage and asked Erik to prepare an infusion. I had no confidence in the remedies of apothecaries, but I did have the greatest respect for the boy's herbal knowledge. She is ill? One hand went to the throat in an instinctive gesture that betrayed his anguished alarm. Oh, it's nothing serious, just a low fever, but she will not be able to travel for a while. I thought perhaps you might know of something. Yes, he said hastily, there is something. She wouldn't take anything bitter, though, would she? Perhaps I can sweeten it with honey. And he turned away with an air of distraction that only heightened my growing concern. I don't want it, said Luciano mutinously when I presented the potion an hour later. You know I hate medicines, Papa. Very well, I said coolly. I shall tell Erik that you refuse to take it like the baby you are. She sat up suddenly, pushing the heavy hair back from her flushed face. Erik? She echoed wonderingly. Erik made the spray? Reaching out her hand, she took a little wooden goblet from me and swallowed its contents without another murmur of protest. And that was the moment I finally acknowledged defeat. I was too old, too sick, and too generally weak-minded where she was concerned to make to stand on any issue that Luciano was determined to fight. She didn't go back to Milan. The tragedy had already begun. Well, that's it for that chapter. See you later.